Hi, everyone. My name is Dale Schlunt, and today I'd like to speak a little bit about the legacy of Thomas Jefferson. And this is inevitably challenging for several reasons. One of those being the vast contributions of Jefferson to his society, as well as those that our contemporaries continue to value and utilize today. Hence, it begs the question, how do we determine on which to focus? The other challenging aspect is that we're all familiar with the fact that Jefferson was a slave owner. He owned slaves throughout his entire adult life. And we have to question, how do we reconcile that with some of the more positive attributes that we'd like to highlight? Our goal should be to examine Jefferson's life through an objective lens, and therefore we can't simply discount or overlook one part of his life because it does not fit into the historical narrative that we would prefer. And so with that being said, I'd like to focus during this short time on one positive as well as one negative part of his life. Jefferson's ownership of slaves cannot be excused simply because of the context in which he lived. According to Lucia Stanton, between 1776 and 1826, Jefferson owned anywhere between 165 slaves to 225 slaves at any one point in time on his Virginia plantations. Very disheartening figures, to be sure. In addition to that, he was also conflicted about the institution of slavery. He understood the atrocities of it, yet he continued to own slaves all the way until his passing. Yet Jefferson, something that perhaps is lesser known, attempted to work towards what he thought would be a gradual emancipation. Also, he tried to reform the institution of slavery on his own plantations. For instance, as author of the Declaration of Independence, he adamantly criticized the slave trade. This was in his original draft, and of course this was heavily edited in the final draft. In 1784, Jefferson authored the land ordinance that would have banned slavery in all of the western territories under the Articles of Confederation. Despite this attempt, it failed to pass due to one vote. And of course, that ordinance was replaced with one in 1785. On his plantation, Jefferson understood the difficult realities of being a slave hand in the field. And starting in the 1790s, after the harvest, Jefferson attempted to offer his slaves a skilled trade. For instance, nail making, blacksmith, construction. All of this lent itself well to Jefferson's renovations and additions at Monticello. He also offered them incentives instead of the more rigorous discipline regime by giving his slaves a percentage of the profits from the sale of such things as those nails they made. Jefferson was always pondering other ways to create revenue rather than selling slaves. Unfortunately, a very profitable industry during in that context, during that time. One of the ways that he avoided this was renting slaves out as labor. He even mortgaged slaves. All of this done, when you look at it comprehensively, was to create a lifestyle for Jefferson. Jefferson was one of the elite in Virginia, part of the aristocracy, if you will. And it was all a means to an end, and that was to retain his socioeconomic status. And so when you look at it as a whole, it is definitely unfortunate. Jefferson, despite his conflicted feelings, did participate in the perpetuation of that institution. And as a result, this becomes part of his legacy. One of the positive aspects that I'd like to point out, and of course there are many, is Jefferson's work for liberties, freedoms. We could look at this from a very wide scope or a very narrow scope, but when trying to find how should we remember Jefferson, perhaps one of the best individuals to ask was Thomas Jefferson himself. On his tombstone, he had three things inscribed. One of those being that he was the author of the Declaration of Independence. The other that he was the author of the Virginia State Bill for establishing religious freedoms, and that he was the father of the University of Virginia. I would like to focus on the Virginia State Bill for establishing religious freedoms. One of the reasons that I'd like to discuss it is because it has such far-reaching effects. It not only became a precedent for other states to follow all the way into the 19th century, but also was a precedent for the First Amendment. And it did three things. First, it gave legal protection for individuals to openly proclaim their religious beliefs. It also no longer required individuals to pay taxes to an established church that they did not belong to, something that had a long-term precedent in Virginia under their status as a colony. And finally, that it allowed anyone, regardless of the religious belief they subscribed to participate in civil or political life. This has been interpreted in many ways. Academics, historians, even the Supreme Court, when they're looking at the First Amendment, they often look back to Jefferson's bill on religious freedoms to understand the intent of the First Amendment. And as Daniel Dreisbach, who has done much work on this specific area in Jefferson, makes the argument that this bill had one purpose, and that was to facilitate a more pluralistic, a more diverse society in terms of religious belief, to protect all kinds of religious belief. What it was never meant to do, and many times this is how it's interpreted in the 20th and 21st century, was to disestablish any kind of relationship between government and church, and government and religious belief. That was never its intent, but of course we interpret laws, we interpret the past from the lens that we see it, and many times that's influenced by the time period in question. When we look at Jefferson as a whole, he was truly human. He had such admirable characteristics. He was a pragmatic individual, and much of that pragmatism we benefit from today, but he was also an individual with many flaws. And so if we want to find truth, we have to look at him as a whole individual. Thank you so much for your time.